Oh, when I first heard it, I flipped. I said, I want to make an album like that, where all the songs seem to be like a collection of folk songs, you know? And we did Pet Sounds after that. The inspiration for Pet Sounds was Rubber Soul. That was the one that got me going. November of '65, at my house in Beverly Hills, my friend goes, I want you to listen to this album by the Beatles. And I got so blown out that I went to the piano and started writing songs, started making melodies. I wanted to try to top it. I felt competitive with the Beatles. You know, it's a funny thing. It's funny. But I felt competitive with them. I smoked some marijuana and listened to Rubber Soul and like Norwegian Wood and Michelle and all those songs. Blew my mind. Just totally took my mind away. I thought to myself, God, they're so good. I feel competitive about this, you know. I said, I want to do something good like Rubber Soul, you know.
Determined to beat the Beatles, Brian enlisted songwriter and advertising copywriter Tony Asher as his collaborator.
When we were beginning to work on Pet Sounds, Brian and I both talked about Rubber Soul and said, let's try to do that. Let's try to put the bar up there where this album had put it, you know.
And we also prayed for an album. We didn't have a title, nothing, you know, for an album that would be a rival to Rubber Soul. And, you know, praying to a rival, you know, I mean, it was all kind of like, it was a prayer, but there was some ego there.
Reluctantly, Capitol indulged Brian's desire to produce a new type of album.
He said, I just want to make the best album that was ever made. And he had this inside of him to do that.
The result was Pet Sounds, the emotional autobiography of its 23-year-old producer. It was an album that startled the music world.
In Pet Sounds, we did things based around Bach. We did things based around Spector, combining flutes and piccolos and French horns and trumpets. It was all a definite sound.
Capitol Records failed to embrace Brian's new musical direction. 8 weeks after the release of Pet Sounds, they stocked record stores with a greatest hits album. In England, Pet Sounds was hailed as an instant classic. Paul McCartney and John Lennon said the album inspired their work on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. To promote Pet Sounds, the Beach Boys hired the Beatles publicist Derek Taylor, who made sure the right people wrote about the music. The rest of the band often resented their portrayal as the unwitting messengers of Brian's genius.
On the charts, Pet Sounds went to number 10 and featured 4 top 40 hits, including Sloop John B., Wouldn't It Be Nice, and God Only Knows.
Andrew Loog Oldham, he was managing the Stones at the time, and he did something that was unprecedented. He took out, at his own expense, a full-page ad in the local rags at the time, you know, the Melody Maker and the New Musical Express and stuff like that, saying, this is the greatest record I've ever heard in my life. And he was talking about Pet Sounds. And that in the industry, in the pop music industry in England, was so unbelievable that somebody else that was not profiting from their music, that had nothing to do with them, would take out a full-page ad to praise this record. It sent ripples through the industry, and everybody wanted to listen to Pet Sounds, and of course with good reason.
Hearing more about Brian Wilson and the genius of Brian Wilson, and you start looking at those records and listening to those records in a much different way.
I think what Derek was doing that was smart was trying to legitimize Brian.
Derek made the connection between the Beatles and the Beach Boys, so I mean, it doesn't get much better than that if you want to make a transition, have people pay attention.
Derek saw the big picture. I think he was the guy letting the Beatles know, hey, you guys better watch out. you better work a little harder because he's doing stuff that's going to blow your mind.
The Beatles were going their way, and Brian was going his, and they were kind of looking over their shoulder and seeing what was coming up on the outside rail. And I think that was the effect of it. They wanted to experiment more. They wanted to do rather more outrageous things.
It was way advanced of what anybody was doing at that point. And I think the Beatles recognized that, and I think every harmony group in the world recognized that there was something different going on. Yeah, this is not just surfing music done by a bunch of ragheads from California. This is something completely different and very sophisticated.
The Beatles and the Beach Boys were chasing each other up a spiral. It's like the never-ending spiral.
It floored me. I thought it was fantastic, and it gave the Beatles great inspiration, and it gave a challenge to them too.
John and Paul called me after they heard Pet Sounds and told me how much they liked it. It was quite an honor for me.
We've all dropped acid, and we're in my office at 147 Ivor Court. We played Pet Sounds over and over again. Pet Sounds inspired the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper.
After the Beatles heard Pet Sounds, they wanted to make a greater album, so they did Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And it was a very, very, very great album. Right up there with Pet Sounds, and it was like really good.
The Beatles, they were completely hooked on Pet Sounds. I was told that personally by John Lennon, by George Harrison.
And then we came out with Good Vibrations, and they came out with Penny Lane and all those songs, you know.